Could you imagine if someone actually did this? What's this freak? Call the police.
Now dig on this.
It's just like, I don't know what you even say about this. This is just like... there's nothing to say.
Dig on this. He just starts humping the air.
Hello everyone, welcome to Internally Screening. Today we're doing the third ever episode of Sloppy Sequels, a series where we go into sequels, infamous sequels, and discuss whether they are either sloppy or, not sloppy. There wasn't really that much thought put into it other than alliteration, to be completely honest. Today we're going to be covering one of the most infamous sequels of all time, Sam Raimi's magnum opus, if you see it that way, Spider-Man 3, the legendary Spider-Man 3. The Spider-Man 3 that there isn't too much to say about, really. It's so legendary in meme culture at this point.
Yeah.
But we did just watch it. I have seen it before.
And I've never seen it. In spite of my love for the first two Spider-Man, Spider-Man films, I shouldn't say I love Spider-Man.
I love Spider-Man.
I just love Spider-Man. I love Maguire and I love the first two of his films. And I somehow... Yeah, I love Sam Raimi, and I somehow never saw this film. I don't know how I avoided it. It came out when I was like 11, and it somehow I never, over all these years, found the time. And, we started doing this series, and I was like, holy shit, this is the perfect opportunity for me to finally break my Spider-Man 3, my Bully Maguire virginity.
Yeah. We'll try not to focus on these films too much, but as always, we kind of have to cover the previous film a little bit. The first two Spider-Man films by Sam Raimi, for a lot of people our age, we're like 26, so when those films came out, we were kids. And for me, personally, the first two Spider-Man films are just some of the best Hollywood blockbuster films ever. I was absolutely obsessed with those films.
Yeah.
Like the first Marvel thing in general I ever enjoyed or fell in love with, really. To an extent, still probably, in terms of my nostalgic goggles, sure, but in terms of my enjoyment, nothing really comes close to Spider-Man 1 and 2 for me. And even today, even though I look back on those first two films and there's goofy elements to them, there are also, as an adult, I can now enjoy just how amazing some of the filmmaking is and how idiosyncratic Sam Raimi's directorial style is.
For sure.
As a kid, it's something that you obviously don't see. It's completely invisible to you.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you saw them as well, right?
Oh, yeah. I definitely agree. The older I've gotten, the more I've appreciated how silly, the silliness in them is Sam Raimi's style comes through in all of the things that you could mistake as just being purely goofy and purely because I watched these again a few years ago with my sister, and we were both laughing how shit it was. And I watched them again earlier this year, and I was after having watched all the Evil Dead films and the Evil Dead TV series and all the stuff that Sam Raimi has put his name to that's of ridiculously great quality, and you see it all those little flares of Evil Dead-isms in those films, and you understand the goofiness isn't just silly.
I mean, what's so great about the first two Spider-Man films in particular is whoever came up with the idea to get Sam Raimi to make a film about Spider-Man, because as a character, Spider-Man is obviously the entire appeal of him is kind of his physicality and what he can do. Yeah. And getting a director as visually creative as Sam Raimi to make that is a match made in heaven. And the first two Spider-Man films are just on screen, just fireworks 24/7.
Yeah.
And there's a number of things coming together. I also think that the films are really, really well cast, and the music's great, and there's just all these great elements came together, and it's all well and good us liking the films, but at the time these films were also a sensation.
Oh yeah, for sure.
They were huge box office hits. I think they really people like to give X-Men 1 a lot of credit for sort of beginning the superhero revival era.
It was a couple of years before.
But for me, Spider-Man is where it really kicked in.
I think the X-Men films are important. The first,
but if you watch X-Men 1,
it's way goofier.
It's not very good.
But I do still really enjoy it.
I like
genuinely.
it.
I think that one is potentially more nostalgia goggles.
But as with X-Men, Spider-Man also has its third film, which we're talking about today. So just like X-Men 3 being a complete mess. Wasn't going to let Brett Ratner, of all fucking people, upstage him. He was like, let me make the mess of the century. And he made Spider-Man 3. In fact, really, Sam Raimi said it all for us and kind of did the sloppy sequels bit for us. And it's no secret, really, that Sam Raimi is not fond of Spider-Man 3 at all. And he said, it's a movie that just didn't work very well. I tried to make it work, but I really didn't believe in all the characters. So that couldn't be hidden from people who love Spider-Man. If the director doesn't love something, it's wrong of them to make it when there are so many other people who love it. I think raising the stakes after Spider-Man 2 was the thinking going into it, and I think that's what doomed us. I should have just stuck with the characters and the relationships and progressed them to the next step, and not tried to top the bar.
Yeah, well, I guess that is the most infamous thing if we're talking about the classic criticism of this film has always been there's too much going on. There's too many characters, villains in particular, and too many storylines kind of intersecting wildly. And you know, it has become a thing kind of since this film, the notion of having 3 villains. You know, if 3 villains appear in a trailer for something, people often sigh and groan and they go, oh, for fuck's sake, this is going to be a mess. I don't think the 3 villains here is the problem. As Sam Raimi says himself, the problem is he doesn't really know what to do with them, and he doesn't care about all of them.
I don't think there are many films that feel as uniquely, just completely disjointed in terms of their pacing as this film. There's something so sort of slapdash and just thrown together about how it's edited. And that's not to say that like no effort was put into this film, because if you watch this film, that's what kind of makes this film such an enigma, is there is clearly a lot of effort going in so many scenes, and we can go over some of the like good sequences in this film
for sure,
because it's not a film without merit, and I actually don't think it's necessarily as terrible as some people make it out to be, in terms of it having a decent amount of redeeming qualities to it. It's just that as a whole piece, it feels like a sort of mosaic of different scripts kind of put into a shredder and then reassembled.
Very much, particularly in the way, like you say, that it's paced. So I guess kind of we don't really need to discuss the storyline of this film because everyone watching this will know it inside and out. But we kind of, as we begin the film, you get like this very hand-holding montage scene setting with narration from Tobey Maguire of like, hey, life's great and I'm doing all these things.
And it recaps the ending of Spider-Man 2 despite the opening like title sequence already doing that.
Right, exactly. And it does all this kind of really schmaltzy, like, life's great kind of stuff, and then immediately cuts to like Green Goblin shit and like a really massive fight scene, and then old Venom lands out of nowhere and old Sandman's being set up. So there's this really sort of genteel 5 minutes, and then a bang, 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 bang.
And when you think about Spider-Man 2, how it kind of eases into the introduction of Dr. Octopus, or how in Spider-Man 1, Norman Osborn is omnipresent throughout the film, and his character arc is sort of in tandem with Peter's character arc.
Oh, 100%.
Think about how sort of well constructed those are and how much precision there was in the script making. It does imply that this film is infamous for there being a lot of studio interference involved, and to what degree we'll probably never know.
Yeah.
But you can kind of see the stitches and make your own assumptions.
We were definitely hypothesizing as we were watching that Venom as a character in particular felt like something that was being pushed for. I'm sure I've heard that somewhere.
I've heard it as well, but I just don't know how true it is.
I don't know how true it is either, but you can very much make that assumption from what is presented. The way Venom is introduced, we may as well start there as a big flaw with the film that lots of people, lots of fans of the character and Spider-Man in general have, is they fucked Venom up. We're not huge fans of what they've done with Venom subsequently. No. You know, the Tom Hardy, well, certainly the first Tom Hardy film is trash, and I can only imagine Let There Be Carnage is equally trash. The way it's handled here feels like a complete side note, like a complete like, oh, do we really have to if we have to include in, this is how we do it. Like the way the symbiote just lands in the background of a shot of there's no build up to it, there's no real like
there's so much of it just seems to cut, so much of the Venom storyline seems to come down to random coincidences.
Right.
So like it randomly lands, and then he randomly gets it on him, and then when he wants to get it off, it randomly falls in a church that Eddie Brock randomly happens to go to.
Yeah.
It's just like, it's all so random. So
Yeah.
I can't help but feel like they had a script and then had to alter it to include Venom. And it was just a really inorganic way of getting to the points they felt they needed to hit for whatever reason.
Yeah.
I've never found Venom particularly interesting in any of his film incarnations, and he seems to mostly just be quite a cool character design.
Right, because there's not a huge amount of character depth to him or Eddie Brock, really.
So what I'm actually going to say is, I don't really think the execution of Venom is that terrible in this film. I just think that he doesn't need to be there. Because I know a lot of people like to, back in the day, you can go look up all the old school Spider-Man 3 reviews that everyone's done. A lot of people like to wail on Topher Grace and how lame he is. And I think a lot of that comes down to people being like, oh, Venom should have been badass.
Right.
And I don't really care if Venom is totally cool or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't really mind how he's done. I just think that he doesn't need to
I
be
think
there.
the silly schlockiness of it all and the way how hammed up Topher Grace's performance is.
And his voice just doesn't match
Yeah.
the demon.
I actually kind of find that to be one of the more charming aspects.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, throughout the film, I think the humour is generally fantastic, whether intentional or otherwise. And it's a very hard thing to tell with Sam Raimi what he's genuinely intending, because his humour is so slapstick. And so, you know, if there's a goofy bit of sound design, like early on, there, like where he takes out the Green Goblin, you have this huge fight scene, then suddenly like a doink. Badoing.
That's heat. That's so fucking good.
That is the most amazing sound design I've ever heard. And you can't tell, it's very hard to tell, did he do that on purpose? But it kind of doesn't matter, because it all kind of achieves the same sensation.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, coming back to the Venom character, I kind of prefer there's some kind of interesting element of like silliness and goofiness that's very clearly Sam Raimi than the kind of very bland offering that we've had from the character subsequently, and that the character kind of is otherwise. He's just like a cool black Spider-Man that kills people.
I find the Topher Grace version of Venom unironically far more fun to watch than
Like,
the Tom Hardy version.
That much is true. I still don't think it's very good. I can completely,
it is bad,
I can completely see why people were annoyed by this. But there is some like level of humour and a kind of ironic enjoyment you can get out of that.
The biggest problem of the presence of Venom in the film is that it's clearly eating into film time that was supposed to be dedicated to Sandman, who seems to be, from my perception at least, what the film is most interested in. Specifically because he isn't introduced through a number of coincidences and random shit just happening, and then they kind of chuck him in the third act. Like, there is a whole sequence in the beginning sort of dedicated to his backstory, and then it's never returned to, clearly because the film is like, oh shit, we got to cover all this other ground. And it eats into his screen time, despite the fact that as a villain he's much more compelling.
I think it's really frustrating because they clearly pay so much attention to detail. I remember seeing a video on the scene where he becomes Sandman.
It's a great sequence,
and they do this sort of the CG sand forming up. There's like a brilliant video on that kind of breaks down how sort of well thought out and well engineered that scene is. From that, it is apparent how much Sam Raimi like wants to focus on this character, and yet we never go back to his family and like what drives him as a character. It purely becomes another thing for Peter Parker to be obsessed over, because they do the awful thing of retconning the fact that this guy, the Sandman, actually killed Uncle Ben.
That is probably the worst story element of the entire film, because not only is it a weak motivation for Peter Parker, because we've already seen Spider-Man 1. All it's doing is trying to coast off of the emotions of a previous film, and sort of trying to ruin a previous film by going back to a plot point that Peter has already sort of
resolved.
He's the first two Spider-Man films, so much of it is about his trauma surrounding like Uncle Ben's murder. To like suddenly dig that back up again,
it's so lazy,
incredibly lazy.
It's horribly. It strikes me as they couldn't think of a good reason to have there be conflict between Sandman and Spider-Man.
Well, it's like
they just went, oh well, what's the thing that Spider-Man cares about? Oh, Uncle Ben. So we'll tie him back into Uncle Ben.
It's like if you were doing homework for school and then you'd done some homework before where you got really good marks, so you just copy and paste the bit that you got good marks for before into this homework
and hope
you're doing.
they don't fucking
and hope they don't notice. That's kind of what they've done, right? So because
thematically for the character, it regresses him, right? Because we're at a completely different point of this character's existence, and I think some of the good that does come from the symbiote stuff is the black suit Spider-Man and Bully Maguire, that whole meme. There is, we could talk a bit about the positives in that storyline and the potential there, but that exists way down the line to the emotional state that Peter was in when Uncle Ben died. So dragging that stuff and putting it in this stuff is not only a mess, and not only lazy, but just completely ruins the character's sense of progression.
Yeah, I mean, the whole film is supposed to be focusing around sort of the dark side of Peter's character and, how the symbiote, physically manifests that. Yeah. Surely the focus should have been on the fact that he murdered a guy previously, because that's sort of the darkest thing he ever does, because Spider-Man never really kills anyone.
Yeah, he only ever kills that one guy.
Or how responsible was he for Norman Osborn's death?
Right.
But that would be a really interesting thing for the film to focus on, particularly with the Harry stuff, which we haven't even touched on.
Yeah.
I need to talk to you. Explain things.
Tell it to my father. Raise him from the dead.
You don't have to do that. Come on, man.
I'm your friend, Harry. I cared about your father.
Come on, Jeeves. Talk some sense into him. They should have gone to see Cats.
That would be a very different side of the film.
No holds barred, full frontal experience.
Good.
Imagine if she was dressed up as a cat right now. It would improve this scene 10 times over. But yeah, going back to just the original inciting incident for Spider-Man in general being Uncle Ben's murder, it's just incredibly lazy and really weak attempt at emotional manipulation.
Yeah, no, I agree. Full spoilers from here on out. We've already been spoiling it, but whatever. When we come back to the end of Sandman as his art, it's all very frustrating because you get all this interesting setup, then you get the ridiculous tie into Spider-Man that's kind of insulting to the audience, and then you get really nothing. He just kind of wanders into a couple of action set pieces.
He's absent from so much of the film.
Yeah, very little character progression, and then at the end, after beating the shit out of Spider-Man and nearly killing him, he goes, "Oh yeah, I was really sorry," and then he cries and he goes, "Oh actually," and then like you said in the footage, they retcon the retcon.
Yeah, they change it, so they literally show you the cheesy black and white footage. They show you a version of it at a police station when they just someone realises that Uncle Ben was actually killed in this way with him involved, and then they show you a different black and white footage with some slightly different events, which Sandman then describes. So it's they retcon the retcon. It's the laziest writing, and it's really annoying. Because there are elements of writing in this film that are almost kind of good, but that is just terrible.
Yeah. As if it wasn't bad enough that they'd done it in the first place to tie his character in that way. They then couldn't think of any interesting reason why Spider-Man would be antagonistic towards him. It's such a horrible example of wasted potential for a character.
Yeah.
You do all this hard work setting him up, and there's absolutely no payoff for it whatsoever.
Well, speaking of wasted potential for a character, the other biggest sin, in my opinion, this film commits is what they do with Harry's character. Because the end of Spider-Man 2 is a great cliffhanger. It sets up so many brilliant possibilities. And this film has, a fairly decent opening action scene with him and Harry.
Yeah.
He hits his head, it goes dong, and he has amnesia inexplicably until the script kind of requires that he doesn't have amnesia anymore, because he just kind of snaps out of it.
Yeah, which is ridiculous, isn't it? It's fucking ridiculous. So, again, laziest shit ever. Maybe the most...
It's just wasted potential.
It is, again, but it's also maybe the most outrageous cliche or use of cliche in a movie I've seen in a long time.
He forgets a very specific amount of time.
Yeah. Oh, I've forgotten the last 2 movies worth of time. Fuck off. Yeah. It's ridiculous. The whole I have amnesia, who am I, where am I, oh, are you my friends type bullshit is such a tired cliche that it you never even see it anymore, because it's so known as a cliche that it's actually been avoided. Normally cliches just keep popping up everywhere, but this is one everyone knows.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable that talented writers would come and do that sort of shit. And then, like you say, he conveniently sort of snaps out of it for no good reason, maybe a half an hour later into the film's runtime. And what I hypothesize is the reason for it lasting that 30-minute section is so that you have time to set up Sandman and Venom.
Yeah.
Because otherwise,
there's no other reason.
if there's still a revenge plot going on from Green Goblin, how the fuck are we supposed to fit these guys? It's just convenience. There's no artistic reason other than we're trying to write ourselves out of a corner.
It's just also, it doesn't take a genius to see like how interesting and how much fun you could have with Harry scheming against Peter.
100%.
And it seems weird that they even tried to slot that action scene in so early, other than they just needed an action scene early on in the film for like pacing reasons, which is hilarious because the film is so badly paced. As we were discussing, it becomes this bizarre machination of character motivations where, you know, MJ's in the film and she's got her problems, and Harry comes back and she finds out that he doesn't have amnesia anymore, and then Harry tells her to break up with Peter, but Peter doesn't know that this is happening, and then they meet up and he talks to Harry, doesn't think he has amnesia, and it just becomes this hugely convoluted and really like just not compelling. It doesn't feel like a bunch of characters interacting in a way that either progresses the story or is just intriguing. It actively feels like writers trying to escape a hole that they've been put in more than anything. It feels like a kind of gymnastics more than an actual storyline. Because a normal love triangle would have worked so much better.
Right, it's so convoluted. Like we were saying when we were, you know, reacting, it's more effort to achieve less.
Yeah.
You know, you just have the bog standard love triangle, but you have the actual characters' real motivations coming through and progressing them naturally in different directions, pulling them from one place to another. Where it's just one character pulling strings on different people, you're only actually seeing the intentions of that one character.
A love triangle is cliche, but a love triangle is as good as the characters that are in a love triangle, right? And they're all good characters, and they're all good actors, and they're all, you know, pretty well cast. So even if you did a really bog standard love triangle storyline, that could be really good. Loads of like brilliant, like 10 out of 10 films have a love triangle in them, and it doesn't matter that it's a cliche because it's just well done.
I wouldn't even say it's a cliche, it's just a template, really. It's just, it's the framework for something, and like they completely rejected that here, and it's hard to know why, other than like you say, just writing their way out of a hole. A lot of this film does just feel like trying to like fix a mistake. Like, you know, you had a script and they go, but you need this in it, so then, you know, you weave around it, and then suddenly everything's broken apart and you're like, oh my god. What's frustrating is as well, like the whole amnesia thing, I had hope when it was unveiled that maybe this was part of the scheme. I thought that could have been a really interesting
you could have had a great
element.
double fake, like, you know.
Like he fights Spider-Man because he's so angry about it, and then he gets bitched the fuck out. He gets completely beaten up, and he's like, right, I need to recoup, I need to train, I need to discover some weaknesses on Spider-Man, like find a way of getting under the armor. And so he fakes amnesia and plays innocent and to gain intel.
That could have either been a great B plot or a great twist, but
and also straight up, this film should completely have focused a plot,
Harry and
Peter, because it's been building that way. It feels so natural, like the whole.
That's what Spider-Man 1 and 2.
Particularly in the end of Spider-Man 2, it really builds towards.
That implies so much significance that Spider-Man 3 just doesn't really deliver.
Yeah.
Seems like it sort of tries to resolve it out the gate, and then like kind of comes back to it, and then like the fun section at the end with him fighting with Harry is fun, but it feels sort of weirdly sort of like, oh, and we've come back to this, like, oh, we remember, as opposed to like, oh, this is what the film has been building to.
I mean, this film just feels like different sections. They're like, oh shit, we've had our Green Goblin section, here's the Sandman section, oh shit, we forgot about Venom, here's the Venom section, and it just keeps doing that, keeps chunking it up. And so one of my favourite sections of the film, the Bully Maguire section.
Well, I was going to say, this is a whole thing that I wanted to talk about, is the comedy in this film.
Yeah.
So it's really, 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 really hard to tell what is supposed to be funny.
Yeah.
And in terms of like when I'm watching a film, you know, and I'm like, oh, is this good? This film makes it so hard. I just don't know what to make of it, because it's almost, there's so much precision in some of the shots, like the scene in the bar where he's dancing and he goes like, can you dig it or something?
Dig on this.
And it like, they put so much effort into it. Everything's shot so dramatically. The scene is like lit in this very specific way. I think it's supposed to be funny. I think some of that stuff is actually just good.
So we, again, a lot of this is hypothesizing on Raimi's intentions. So if we go along with the belief that he didn't really want Venom in this film, which seems like very likely, then the Bully Maguire section, which of course is like such a huge meme at this point, I just didn't realise how contained within one kind of 20-minute section direction it was.
Yeah, it's like right in the middle.
Yeah. I thought it was going to be like spread throughout the entire film, and so like all of these memes that we have of that were like kind of taken from, you know, bits and bobs. Nah, it's like this condensed, absolutely
like 20-minute section,
immaculate comedic set of scenes. It's unreal. I think it's Sam Raimi going, if you make me put Venom in this film, I'm gonna do it my way, and I'm gonna make him goofy as shit. I don't give a fuck.
Yeah.
I don't give a fuck what
the
you
comics
think.
say. Yeah.
And I think something that's genuinely cool about the way Peter's character goes in this film, that the Bully Maguire act emphasizes, is that I was under the impression going into it that it was going to be purely, Spider-Man is good. Spider-Man encounters something that makes him bad, good and bad fight inside him. But it's by far and away not as binary as that. Like in any way, shape, or form. It's kind of, he kind of gets this, like, these delusions of, I guess not delusions of grandeur. He lets the fame go to his head, right? And he's like acting like everything's like sunshine and roses, and so like he's trying to be supportive for Mary Jane, but he's actually just being very like narrowly focused on his own things. Like, life's going great for me, so it's going great for you. And he's still very warm-hearted, but you can gradually see him becoming more and more arrogant and narcissistic and just like self-obsessed. And then as things get worse in his life, that he can't handle that, and then the symbiote comes to him. And I think that's a really interesting thing.
There's so much potential there.
Yeah. Again, there are kind of 3 films worth of stories here crammed into one, and Sam Raimi is doing absolutely everything he can to juggle them, but in doing juggling, like he kind of misses the point.
I feel like the villain thing is true. Like, there's too many villains. Right, that there's an element of truth to that, but I don't really actually feel like that's the biggest problem with the film.
No,
just there being lots of villains. I think you could have all of these villains here, and it could work fine. It's just that the film needs to know what to focus on.
Right,
that's the focus needs to be on primarily Harry and Peter.
Yeah.
And you can have Sandman as your primary villain, and then you could have Venom as like kind of just a thing.
Yeah.
The problem is Venom kind of is a side thing, and he is kind of just on the side, and you know he's really not that important in terms of the film's trajectory in most senses of the plot. But the themes of the film lean much closer to Venom than they do Sandman in terms of that, like, Peter's sort of becoming a bit evil, right?
Yeah.
So because the film is more thematically relevant to Venom, then you just have to have Sandman just absent for most of the film, so it just kind of fucks the pacing.
Yeah.
Completely.
But I mean, I do have to stress just how fucking amazing the Bully Maguire section of this film is. I think the pacing and structure of everything before and after it actually makes the film quite tiresome. I was anticipating that because of all these memes and because of my familiarity with so many plot beats of the film before coming into it, that I'd have a whale of a time and be like, oh, well, you know, this film's just was unfairly... I was hoping to have that reaction of like, this film's been unfairly judged.
I think there is an element of that.
Yeah, but I also understand it.
It is...
I thought it was going to be... kind of like our reaction to Riddick recently, where you've got this really super goofy concepts and characters, but it ends up being like infectious fun regardless, and this is quite a chore at points. And then the Bully Maguire section is the most streamlined in terms of tone and levity. There's a really solid rhythm to all of it. It's fast paced and fun, and like we said, absolutely hilarious.
Well, this is kind of leads on to sort of the technical elements quite well, because there are so many points of this film that are like funny and goofy in a way that gets memed on, that I think are actually just kind of good. Like one of my favourite scene in the film is the scene where evil Peter shows up at Harry Osborn's house and they have this ridiculous fight, and it finishes with him going, "Gonna cry," and then throwing a grenade back in his face in like the sickest way.
That taste. Strawberries.
What is going on with you? What are you talking about?
Bruh. Is he just wearing that under his... He was just making dinner.
I was expecting this.
He's like, I don't want to waste this great equipment. I use it for my culinary arts.
Do you know how many peppers I can chop with this bad boy?
Stings, doesn't it?
I protected you in high school, now I'm gonna kick your little ass.
This is such a good scene. God,
The sound design's crazy.
It was at this moment that he knew. He fucked up.
That was great.
You were an embarrassment to him.
Fuck.
Wait.
Look at little Goblin Jr. Gonna cry?
That's the best part of the whole film. Straight up.
Oh man, if Bully Maguire was the whole film, it'd be a whole different story.
Yeah. It's one of those things that I feel like was like quite negatively evaluated at the time because it's really silly and goofy.
Right.
But it totally works.
I
genuinely just think it works.
Yeah. I think choreography of the scene's great, and
Yeah.
I think the action choreography throughout the film's pretty great.
It's pretty good, yeah. It's not as good as Spider-Man 2, I would say that. I do think there is some awkwardness to some of the effects that...
I think, the specific use of CG in a lot of places is quite rubbery, and so there's something much more like gritty and like tactile in a way. Yeah. It feels like you can feel things connecting, even if it's CG. It feels like kind of visceral and like it's actually happening. And this is a lot more video game. But that scene, I think even though there's so much pantomime going on with Peter's Bully Maguire persona, there's a lot of like real like kind of repressed emotion coming through in that character that I really like.
We're doing our job. We will catch him.
No, you're not doing your job. I watched my uncle die and we chased down the wrong man. Now you're telling me you had suspicions for 2 years? Witnesses? Why weren't we told about this?
Settle down, son.
No, I have no intention of settling down. This man killed my uncle, and he's still out there.
That's some decent acting from Maguire, in fairness.
He's a good actor.
Yeah, no, I don't think
He is just blessed with a goofy fucking face.
like he's stopped being like the kind of...
He's just kind of scary.
It's kind of like Peter's internal monologue of like, oh my god, I've been taking so much shit for all this, I don't fucking care anymore, I'm just gonna like let you have it. And there's something so satisfying to see in that character,
especially with James Franco's face.
Just getting pummeled to fuck. The amount of times James Franco gets hit in this section of his body in the film, like the amount of like, that guy's got like a worse brain than an NFL player.
He's so concussed at the end of this film. It's probably for the best that he dies.
There's another really fun fight scene as well, the one with Sandman in the underground.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I guess one thing I would say about this is, if we're comparing it to the previous two, Spider-Man 3 doesn't have a classic standout sequence in it to the same level as either Spider-Man 1's final sort of destroyed house sequence with Peter versus Norman, and it doesn't have a train sequence or even the sort of weird horror sequence in Spider-Man 2 with Dr. Octopus killing the nurses and the doctors. Yeah. Doesn't have anything that stand out, and I think this film is, from what I can tell anyways, severely lacking like a real Sam Raimi just having some fun with some goofy practical effects scene. Right. It's mostly a lot of like CGI and some sort of like weird composite effects with like people sort of swinging around, and some of that stuff is pretty good, but it is also on a technical level worse than the previous ones. Even though I do think there is actually still a lot of technical stuff going for this film. Right. Yeah, I mean the score obviously slaps as well.
Oh yeah. I mean, I do think this is gonna be nitpicky as shit. Yeah. I think they play the Spider-Man theme too often, like the theme for the character. So like,
I think it's because in a normal film you have like a theme written for like each section of the film. Yeah. I have a feeling that like it was probably fine, but this film is so clearly like remixed and mashed back up into some sort of abomination to get it to go how some studio head wanted it to go. Right. I feel like it may have just been like they then had the score done, so they just had to paste it on top. Right.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Yeah, that is really overly nitpicky, I will admit. But it was something that I kept noticing, and it just kind of added to that sense of like the cluttered, confused nature of it all. Like to me, that theme plays at like the triumphant moments of his character. Yeah. And they were playing it at all the kind of these kind of goofy moments of like pantomime, like when he's letting his heroics go to his head, and it felt like inappropriate in a lot of those moments for that music to be playing.
I mean, I think ultimately a lot of the personal sort of character arcs in this film just don't really hit.
There's also so many characters as well, because it's not just the villains. You've also got the interweaving thing of Gwen Stacy and Mary Jane, which is really...
She just kind of gets dropped towards the end of the
yeah,
film,
well, it dropped. She immediately, as soon as we have the
they
jazz
break
club
up in the
scene,
bar, and then
she's just
gone.
fucking gone.
Yeah.
It's just juggling so much, and then of course you have his brief interaction with the landlord that suddenly that for a small amount of time,
Really weird.
and then the go make me some cookies girl.
Yeah, I mean there is just like loads of stuff.
He's having like a romance. There's obviously the subplot with Eddie Brock, like with the
with the job and the fake photos.
Because of course you have to somehow set up Venom, which is quite funny. There's some quite good interactions with with Eddie Brock, because I think that's where Topher Grace shines. Not so much as Venom, but as Eddie Brock.
I think he's genuinely quite underrated in this film.
You're trash, Brock.
Excuse me?
Your picture's a fake.
Oh, Parker, you are such a Boy Scout. When are you gonna give a guy a break?
You want forgiveness? Get religion.
That reminds me of that Kanye tweet. Like, find God.
Find God. And yeah, like speaking of the acting, I think a lot of the sort of hatred and sort of mocking of this film comes down purely to the fact that Tobey Maguire has an extremely funny face. And we saw that in Spider-Man 2 as well, where he's like, crucifix, and it's great. And he does it throughout, but because those films were just much better films, people will like allow it. Like this film is goofier, and his face is just especially funny in this film. But I think he got a Razzie for this, and I don't actually think he's that bad in it.
No, I don't think that.
I think there are scenes where he's
the
bad.
writing decisions are the like, and the Bully Maguire thing has become a meme, but I can see you watching it then, and as a creative decision, it is kind of like baffling, eye widening. I don't think that's him being a bad performer.
What is an actor supposed to do? If Sam Raimi says to Tobey Maguire, "You're going to dance and you're going to shake your hips and you're gonna do the finger guns at girls,"
I can see.
What can he do?
I could see Bruce Campbell getting a Razzie for some of his Evil Dead stuff, or like Army of Darkness, sorry, and because Sam Raimi is clearly going for something that isn't necessarily going to be picked up on by the sort of cynical bastards that attend the Razzies. I mean, the Razzies are kind of funny, but sometimes they are humorless bastards, and in this case, I think that's true.
I mean, I can totally see why at the time this film, I think, in terms of it sort of being a cultural icon in a way, or replica, whatever. It came about at the wrong time, because this came out in 2007, and this was just after the Dark Knight, just after Batman Begins, just before the Dark Knight, right?
Dark Knight,
and just before Iron Man.
Yeah.
So people were getting sick of the goofiness,
right?
And Batman Begins had just happened, right? And that was a good film. It was
a landmark,
and it was sort of like
a sea change.
Yeah, things were changing. X-Men 3 had already flopped, and people like the sort of grittier stuff now. And that was really sort of, I think that's why this film is so mocked, because it came at a time where there just was not going to be any understanding for it. If this had somehow, if like an equivalent film had come out around sort of post Guardians of the Galaxy, I think maybe people would have warmed to it a little bit more. Even with its flaws, and because at its core, unfortunately, as many excuses as I want to make for the fun Sam Raimi stuff in this film, it's not a very good film, even if it does have some good stuff in it.
Yeah.
But I do think it's probably a little bit overhated.
Yeah, no, I agree on that.
That would be my assessment.
I like I said before, I am a little disappointed in. I guess I had a misunderstanding or a misconception of what I was going to get with this film. I was expecting full memeage from front to back, and that it was just going to be hilarious.
Because it's so widely mocked.
Yeah, and I thought it was just going to be like a comedic masterpiece, masquerading as a superhero film, and there are obviously moments of that. Sam Raimi is hilarious. He is a really funny director, and there are traces of his charisma and ability, all throughout this film. There's a lot to observe that's technically good, well-arranged sequences, nicely shot passages and things, and his eye for kind of like rhythm. I think that's a classic thing with Sam Raimi. fast-paced and interesting camera shots can be.
Like Evil Dead is just like one big music video.
Right, yeah, 100%. But yeah, by that same token, a lot of his talents are buried in really weak writing, some of the most abysmal pacing I've seen in a superhero film in general, and too many cooks, too many characters, and as we suspect, probably too many people meddling behind the scenes.
Yeah, that's what it feels like.
Yeah,
it's rare that you get a film so big where the fingerprints of different interests feel so obvious.
Yeah.
Like you can see that in a lot, but I feel like this is an example where general audiences actually got a sense for that.
Right.
Because me and you, we watch a lot of films and we're very cynical and we pick films apart. So like we sort of have an eye for that at this point. But I feel like Spider-Man 3 is a case where it's so obvious that even your average moviegoer would probably be like, I don't feel like everybody making that film was on the same page.
Yeah.
For whatever reason. So
yeah.
What would you rate it?
That's a good question.
It's very hard, isn't it?
I think I'll go a 4 out of 10.
Bang on, same.
Yeah.
4 out of 10. It's not as bad as I remember, honestly. And it is kind of fun.
Yeah. No.
It's just, for me, the biggest thing is I love Spider-Man 1 and 2 so much.
Yeah.
And it's so gutting that building up to that Harry storyline that we never got what could have been.
There's just so much potential in this film. There's like how, as we've said, you could take either one of these storylines or just take one out and save it for another film later on and just work on developing the intricacies of those characters. And instead you get something that's very paper thin, and Peter gets explored a lot, and I think there's a lot to be said for the way that that's handled, or rather the thematic things that are discussed in that. Obviously Bully Maguire is such a joke that I think a lot of the thematic importance of what it's conveying is lost.
Yeah.
But I guess we're trying to reevaluate it. I'm having the difficult I'm having a difficult challenge of reevaluating something I never saw. So I'm like reevaluating the cultural zeitgeist of it rather than the actual experience of watching it. But I could sit and watch that 20-minute section of Bully Maguire any day of the week.
There's genuine craft to it. It's
100%.
not like, it's not throwaway. There are elements of it. The script is throwaway.
The script is largely...
the script isn't throwaway. The script has also been slaved over, but it's sort of like someone piecing a corpse back together,
it's not,
and they've got the wrong arm on the wrong side.
It's not someone trying to piece together a piece of art. It's someone trying to piece together a mathematical problem.
It's like that woman did that thing with the painting when she put the smile on it.
Right. It's trying to fix issues. So there's a lot of sort of like precision work being done here to fit allotted amounts of time of each character and not have enough of a break in time so that when the character reappears that you haven't completely forgotten everything about the character. So in that way, there's a kind of masterful work of mathematical precision going on here. Like each character gets bang, 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 this amount of time. Unfortunately, mathematics and science rarely translates into good art because it's soulless, and this film does feel like it's lacking.
Crucially, that would fuck up the film's rhythm, which is, as you said, basically Sam Raimi's #1 gift.
Yeah.
And if you tell a musician, you give a musician an exact structure for a song, and an exact chord progression, and the exact key or whatever, and you're like, make a good song, the song's probably going to suck. Well, this has been our review of Spider-Man 3, the one and only Spider-Man 3, the masterpiece, one of Sam Raimi's most infamous films. We are going to see Sam Raimi again soon with Doctor Strange, and he's going to be MCUing, which gives me mixed emotions. We've been internally screening. If you like this video, like the video. If you dislike the video, dislike the video. Follow the channel, not follow, subscribe to the channel. Give us a comment, call us haters, because we are haters.
We are.
And
that's that.
Peace out.
Peace.